Story 1. The Shadow That Heard Its Name. In the sleepy, tree-lined suburbs of Wayne, Pennsylvania, where the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of lawnmowers, high school life in the early 2000s was a predictable rhythm of cliques, crushes, and cafeteria chaos. For 17-year-old Emily Harper, a junior at Radnor High, life revolved around her tight-knit group of friends, Gabby, Laura, Luke, and Johnny, and the unspoken rules of teenage survival. But beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary world, something unsettling lurked, embodied in a boy known only as Patrick. Patrick was an enigma, a walking contradiction who seemed to exist on the fringes of reality. Short and unremarkable in stature, he cloaked himself in a perpetually filthy gray hoodie, its frayed strings dangling like the threads of a forgotten life. His sunglasses, always perched on his nose, even in the dim glow of fluorescent-lit classrooms, hid eyes that nobody dared to meet. Teachers, unnerved by his vacant stare and the faint, sour odor that clung to him, had long since abandoned their efforts to enforce dress codes or engage him in conversation. Patrick was a ghost in the halls, a shadow that drifted through the school's ecosystem, unnoticed yet impossible to ignore. The first whispers about Patrick began in Emily's sophomore year, when he started claiming he was no ordinary teenager. "I'm a demon," he'd mutter to anyone who lingered too long in his presence, his voice low and deliberate, as if imparting a cosmic secret. Most dismissed it as the ramblings of a troubled kid, a loner desperate for attention. But there was something about the way he said it, something in the hollow cadence of his words, that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She wasn't alone in her unease. Even the most skeptical students avoided saying his real name, a moniker so archaic it felt plucked from a Shakespearean tragedy. Instead, they called him Patrick, a safer substitute that kept the myth at bay. Patrick's strangeness didn't end with his demonic claims. He had a peculiar habit, one that both fascinated and terrified his peers. He would adopt people. It was a ritual as bizarre as it was unpredictable. One day, without warning, he'd approach a classmate, fix them with his unreadable gaze, and declare, "You're adopted." The words carried weight, a promise of protection, or perhaps a warning. Those chosen were part of his circle, safe from whatever nebulous threat he implied. The process was random, inexplicable, and rare. Only a handful of students ever received the designation, and Emily was one of them. She remembered the day vividly. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the school courtyard alive with the chatter of students escaping the confines of algebra and history. Emily was laughing with Gabby, her best friend, when Patrick materialized from nowhere, his hoodie drawn tight around his face. "You're adopted," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, before turning and vanishing into the crowd. Gabby, who'd been adopted weeks earlier, nudged Emily with a nervous giggle. "Guess you're one of us now." Emily forced a smile, but the encounter left her uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that Patrick's words were less a gift than a claim. As the months passed, stories about Patrick grew stranger. He was seen lurking behind bleachers, eavesdropping on conversations with an intensity that felt predatory. Classmates swore he appeared out of thin air whenever his name was spoken, though nobody could explain how. The rumors took on a life of their own, fueled by the adolescent imagination and the eerie consistency of his behavior. Emily tried to dismiss it all as high school folklore, but the incidents that followed would haunt her for years. The first encounter happened on a chilly spring evening behind Radnor High's baseball field. Emily, Gabby, Laura, and Luke were sprawled across the dugouts, their laughter echoing in the twilight. The conversation, as it often did, turned to Patrick. Gabby's cheeks flushed as Laura teased her about Patrick's obvious crush, his lingering stares, and awkward attempts to linger near her in the cafeteria. "He's like a lost puppy," Laura said, grinning. "A creepy, demonic puppy." The group erupted in laughter, but the mood shifted when Laura, caught up in the moment, said Patrick's real name, not the nickname, 3 times in rapid succession. The air grew heavy, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. Emily's heart thudded as she scanned the darkening field. Then from the shadows, a figure emerged. Patrick vaulted onto the dugout with unnatural agility, a baseball bat clutched in his pale hands. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, his sunglasses glinting in the fading light. The bat dangled at his side, not threatening but unmistakably present. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't fear of violence that gripped her. It was the sheer wrongness of the moment, as if Patrick had been summoned by some ancient, unspoken rule. "Hey, Patrick," Emily managed, raising a trembling hand in a half-hearted wave. He nodded, a single, deliberate motion, before leaping down and disappearing into the night. The group sat in a stunned silence until Luke broke the tension with a nervous laugh. "Okay, that was weird as hell." They laughed it off, but Emily's unease lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line, invoked something they didn't understand. The second incident was far more disturbing. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and Emily was at Laura's house. The two of them sprawled across Laura's bed, flipping through magazines and gossiping about school. The conversation drifted to Patrick, as it often did, his oddities a perennial topic. Laura, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes as Emily recounted the dugout incident. "She's just a weirdo who likes freaking people out," she said, but her tone faltered when she accidentally said Patrick's real name 3 times during their back and forth. 10 minutes later, the front door slammed shut with a force that rattled the windows. Emily's stomach dropped. Laura's parents were home, but the sound was too abrupt, too violent. The girls crept downstairs, expecting to find a friend who'd dropped by unannounced. Laura's house was a revolving door of visitors. Instead, they found Patrick standing in the living room, his hoodie dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor. Laura's mom, a kind but no-nonsense woman, was already questioning him. "What are you doing here, Patrick?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "I was summoned," he replied, his tone flat but laced with an eerie certainty. Emily's blood ran cold. Laura's mom, unaware of the context, made small talk before politely ushering him out. The moment he was gone, Emily and Laura exchanged horrified glances. "Did you hear what he said?" Laura whispered. They retreated to Laura's room, their earlier laughter replaced by a creeping dread. It was then they made the connection. Both times his name had been spoken 3 times. It sounded absurd, like a plot from a bad horror movie, but the pattern was undeniable. The group swore never to test the theory again, but teenage bravado has a way of overriding common sense. Months later, at Johnny's house, the topic of Patrick resurfaced. Johnny, the group's resident skeptic, scoffed at the stories, dismissing them as overactive imaginations. "You guys are so gullible," he said, leaning back in a lawn chair on his back deck. To prove his point, he stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and shouted Patrick's real name 3 times into the evening air. The group froze, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, Johnny smirked. "See? Nothing." But before he could sit down, a rustling came from the backyard. Patrick vaulted over the 6-foot fence with terrifying ease, landing in a crouch. He stood slowly, his sunglasses reflecting the porch light, and stared at them for what felt like an eternity. Without a word, he turned, scaled the fence again, and vanished. Johnny's bravado crumbled. He accused the group of setting him up, but their pale faces told him otherwise. The encounter left them shaken, the myth of Patrick no longer a joke. The final incident was the one that broke Emily. It was a stormy night in late spring, and she was home alone, a rare occurrence in the Harper household. Seizing the opportunity, she invited over Ryan, a boy she'd been flirting with for weeks. They were in her room, the rain pattering against the windows, when Ryan brought up Patrick, joking about his creepy reputation. Emily begged him not to say anything, but Ryan, ever the provocateur, grinned and screamed Patrick's real name 3 times at the top of his lungs. The response was immediate. The rain intensified, a torrential downpour that drowned out all other sound. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Emily's heart raced. She ran to her window, peering into the storm, and screamed. A silhouette stood in her driveway, staring up at her. The figure was shrouded in darkness, but the hoodie and sunglasses were unmistakable. It was Patrick. Panic seized her. She slammed the blinds shut and raced downstairs, checking every lock. Through the kitchen window, she saw him again, standing motionless in her front yard, the rain cascading off his hoodie. Her mind spiraled. She screamed, "I'm adopted! I'm adopted!" as if the words could ward him off, a desperate plea to the rules of his twisted game. Ryan, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, pulled her into his arms, but the figure was gone when she looked again. The next morning, Emily ventured into her backyard, her nerves frayed. In the far corner, beneath a gnarled oak tree, she found something that made her blood run cold. Patrick's hoodie, soaked and crumpled, wrapped around a bundle of her missing belongings. A hairbrush, a bracelet, a notebook. It was a shrine, a testament to an obsession she hadn't fully grasped until that moment. Terrified, she hid the items in her room, planning to show her parents when they returned. But Patrick never returned to school. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only rumors and unanswered questions. Some said he'd been institutionalized. Others whispered he'd fled to another state. Emily never told her parents about the hoodie, too afraid of what it might mean. Years later, as an adult, she reflected on the ordeal. The rational part of her mind chalked it up to a disturbed teenager with a knack for stalking and manipulation. But late at night, when the rain tapped against her window, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker had been at play, something that heard its name and answered. Story 2. The Trap in the Snow. Denver, Colorado, in the winter of 2022, was a city of contrasts. Vibrant urban life nestled against the jagged peaks of the Rockies, where snowstorms could transform bustling streets into desolate wastelands overnight. For 25-year-old Mia Delgado, a graphic designer with a penchant for adventure, the city was home, a place where she'd carved out a life of late-night art sessions, dive bar karaoke, and weekend hikes. But on one snowy Saturday evening, a routine errand would plunge her into a nightmare that would forever alter her view of the world. Mia and her friend Mike, a charismatic but impulsive bartender, were headed to a dinner party in the suburbs. The invitation had come from an old college friend, promising a night of good food, better wine, and nostalgic laughter. But as they navigated the snow-dusted streets in Mia's beat-up Honda Civic, Mike suggested a detour to a liquor store. "We can't show up empty-handed," he said, flashing his trademark grin. Mia groaned but relented, knowing the snow was only going to get worse. The liquor store was a fluorescent oasis in the gathering storm, its shelves stocked with local craft beers and bottles of whiskey that gleamed like amber jewels. Mia wandered the aisles, her boots squeaking on the linoleum, while Mike debated between a six-pack and a bottle of bourbon. The snow outside was falling harder now, cloaking the parking lot in a white veil. Mike, ever the procrastinator, darted back inside for a pack of nicotine pouches, leaving Mia to fume in the driver's seat. Her car wasn't built for snow, and every minute felt like a gamble against the worsening weather. When Mike finally returned, Mia pulled out of the lot, her tires crunching through the accumulating snow. The drive to the party was supposed to be a straightforward 20-minute jaunt through familiar neighborhoods, but the storm had other plans. The roads grew slick, the streetlights blurred into halos, and Mia's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Mike, oblivious to her tension, fiddled with the radio, settling on a staticky indie rock station that did little to ease her nerves. They were halfway to their destination, crawling up a steep incline, when Mia rounded a corner and slammed on the brakes. In the middle of the street sat an abandoned car, its hazard lights pulsing like a heartbeat in the snow. Both the driver's and passenger's doors hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. The scene was eerie, a frozen tableau that screamed trouble. Mia's first instinct was to swerve around it and keep going. She'd grown up in a world that taught her to trust her gut, and her gut was screaming to flee. But Mike, ever the bleeding heart, had other ideas. "We should check it out," he said, his voice tinged with concern. Mia shot him a withering look. "Are you insane? We're late, and this looks like a setup." Mike's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. "What if someone's hurt? We can't just leave." Mia's distrust of strangers ran deep, forged by years of navigating a city where kindness could be a liability. But Mike's earnestness wore her down, and she reluctantly pulled over, her car idling a safe distance away. They sat in silence, the hazard lights casting an orange glow across their faces. Mia's imagination ran wild. Images of carjackers, serial killers, or worse flashed through her mind. Mike, growing impatient, reached for the door handle. "I'm going to look," he said. Mia grabbed his arm. "Wait, just give it a minute." He sighed but complied, and they watched the car, its open doors an invitation to something unknown. Minutes ticked by, the snow piling higher. Nothing moved, nothing changed. Mia's nerves were frayed, her fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on the dashboard. Finally, Mike had had enough. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, stepping out into the storm before Mia could stop him. She watched, heart pounding, as he trudged toward the car, his silhouette swallowed by the swirling snow. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a dark shape darting behind a nearby snowbank. Her breath hitched, but she told herself it was just the storm playing tricks. Then the car jolted, a subtle but unmistakable movement, as if something had shifted inside. Mia's blood ran cold. Without thinking, she slammed her palm on the horn, the blaring sound cutting through the storm. Mike froze, startled, then sprinted back to the car, his face pale. Mia didn't wait for him to buckle up. She floored the gas, the Civic fishtailing as she sped away. "What the hell, Mia?" Mike shouted, but she cut him off. "That was a trap. I saw something move." Mike scoffed, but his bravado was thin. "You don't know that. You didn't see anything." Mia's voice was steel. "I'm not risking our lives for a maybe." The rest of the drive was tense, the silence between them heavier than the snow outside. Mia's mind raced, replaying the scene, questioning her decision. Had she overreacted, or had her instincts saved them? They arrived at the dinner party frazzled but intact, the warmth of the house a stark contrast to the storm outside. The evening unfolded as planned, laughter, clinking glasses, and stories of college days long past. Mia and Mike pushed the incident to the back of their minds, letting the party's glow erase the unease. But as the night wound down, their host flicked on the TV to check the storm's progress, and the room fell silent. The local news was broadcasting a breaking story. A woman and her teenage son had been carjacked just 2 hours earlier, not far from where Mia and Mike had stopped. The details were chilling. A car left in the middle of the road, hazards flashing, doors open. When the woman approached to help, 3 men ambushed her, one emerging from the trunk, the others from behind a snowbank. They held her at gunpoint, stole her car, and fled, leaving her stranded in the storm. Mia's eyes met Mike's, the color draining from his face. The party's festive mood evaporated as they recounted their own encounter, the guests hanging on every word. Some called it luck, others called it divine intervention. Mia didn't care for either explanation. All she knew was that she'd never trust a stranger again. The world, already a place of sharp edges, had grown sharper still, and the snow that night had hidden more than just the road. Story 3. The Therapist's Secret. In the summer of 1993, the beachfront estate of the Callahan family was a paradise of sun-soaked days and starlit nights. Stretching along the pristine shores of Cape Cod, the sprawling property was a testament to the wealth and legacy of Patrick Callahan, a patriarch whose 9 children had produced a clan so vast it rivaled a small village. For 10-year-old Daniel Callahan, the youngest son of Patrick's eldest daughter, the beach house was a magical escape from the mundane routines of suburban Boston. It was a place where cousins became siblings, where aunts and uncles spun tales of adventure, and where the ocean's rhythm drowned out the worries of the world. But beneath the idyllic surface, something sinister was brewing, and Daniel, with his wide-eyed innocence, would soon find himself at its center. The Callahan family was a tapestry of personalities, each aunt and uncle a distinct thread in the weave. There was Aunt Maureen, the artist whose bohemian spirit filled the house with color. Uncle Liam, the gruff fisherman who smelled of salt and tobacco, and Aunt Eileen, whose sharp wit could cut through any argument. But Daniel's favorite was Uncle Joseph, a licensed therapist and psychiatrist, whose warm smile and gentle voice made him a confidant to all. Joseph was the father of Daniel's cousin Brandon, a quiet, sullen boy who preferred books to beach games. While Brandon kept his distance, Joseph was a beacon of kindness, always ready with a joke or a story to lift Daniel's spirits. The beach house was a communal haven, its sprawling rooms and wraparound porches filled with the laughter of cousins and the clink of wine glasses. Daniel loved the chaos, the impromptu soccer matches on the lawn, the late-night bonfires, the endless parade of relatives whose names he struggled to remember. His father, one of Patrick's 9 children, was a lawyer who worked remotely during the summer, allowing the family to spend weeks at the estate. Daniel's mother, a school teacher, reveled in the freedom of those months, her usual strictness softened by the sea air. That summer, however, Daniel's world began to fracture. It started with the nightmares, vivid, gut-wrenching visions that left him trembling in the dark. In one, he wandered a desolate version of the beach house, its rooms empty, his family gone. In another, he watched helplessly as the ocean swallowed his parents, their screams muffled by the waves. The dreams were relentless, each one more disturbing than the last. And Daniel, too embarrassed to tell his parents, turned to the one person he trusted, Uncle Joseph. They sat on the porch one humid afternoon, the distant crash of waves a soothing backdrop. Daniel poured out his fears, describing the nightmares in halting, tearful detail. Joseph listened intently, his brow furrowed, his pen scratching notes in a leather-bound journal. "This is your subconscious trying to tell you something," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "You need to reflect on what's troubling you deep down." Daniel nodded, though the advice felt vague and overwhelming for a 10-year-old. Joseph promised to think it over and urged Daniel to return if the nightmares persisted. They did, growing darker and more vivid. A week later, Daniel sought Joseph out again, this time in the study, where the therapist was reviewing patient files. Joseph's expression was grave as he revealed his diagnosis. "Daniel, I've been thinking about your dreams, and I believe you're harboring resentment toward your parents. It's buried deep, but it's there." Daniel was stunned. He adored his parents, obeyed their every rule, and couldn't imagine feeling anything but love for them. But Joseph was a professional, a man whose expertise Daniel had no reason to doubt. "Sometimes," Joseph continued, "our minds hide things from us. Your nightmares are your brain's way of expressing what you won't admit." Confused but trusting, Daniel asked what he should do. Joseph's advice was startling. "Be more defiant. Say no to your parents. Argue when they ask you to do something. It'll help release the tension in your subconscious." Daniel hesitated, but the nightmares were unbearable, and Joseph's confidence was unshakable. For 3 days, he followed the advice, snapping at his parents, refusing chores, and picking fights over trivial matters. His behavior shocked his family, who scolded him for his sudden rebellion. The guilt gnawed at Daniel, but he pressed on, desperate for relief. The nightmares didn't stop. If anything, they grew worse, filled with images of betrayal and abandonment. Daniel returned to Joseph, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The therapist's demeanor had shifted, a faint hesitancy in his eyes. "There's one more thing we can try," he said, his voice low. "Your brain is too mature for your body. We need to set it free." The words sent a chill through Daniel. He begged for clarification, but Joseph demurred, saying he'd explain only if the nightmares continued. That night, Daniel went to bed with a sense of dread. For the first time in weeks, he woke before a nightmare could take hold, his heart pounding in the darkness. The room was silent, the only sound the distant hum of the ocean. But something felt wrong. He lay frozen, too scared to move, his eyes fixed on the wall. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft and unmistakable, right beside his ear. It was Joseph's voice, murmuring words Daniel couldn't make out. Terror surged through him. He whipped around, screaming, and caught a glimpse of Joseph's startled face before the man bolted from the room. Daniel's scream echoed through the house, rousing his parents. He ran to their room sobbing and told them everything. The nightmares, Joseph's advice, the whispering. His father, a towering man with a temper to match, didn't hesitate. He stormed into Joseph's room, his voice booming as he confronted his brother-in-law. Joseph denied everything, his voice trembling, but the confrontation escalated into a physical struggle. In the chaos, Daniel's father seized Joseph's satchel, a leather bag the therapist was never without. Joseph fled, tires screeching as he sped away from the estate. Daniel's father tore open the satchel, and what he found was a nightmare of its own. The bag was filled with notes and articles about inducing nightmares, detailed accounts of psychological experiments, handwritten theories about manipulating dreams, and references to subjects whose descriptions matched Daniel and other cousins. When the police searched Joseph's computer, they uncovered evidence of even darker intentions. though Daniel's parents spared him the details. Joseph was arrested, his career and reputation in ruins. Daniel never saw his uncle again, and his parents avoided the topic, their silence a shield against the pain. As an adult, Daniel wrestled with the memories, blaming himself for his naivety. But the truth was undeniable. Joseph had preyed on his trust, weaving a web of manipulation that nearly broke him. The nightmares faded with time, but the scars remained, a reminder that even in the warmest of families, darkness could lurk in plain sight.